We are live. Are we?
We are live.
Are we? Are we online? Is this what the interweb looks like?
I think so. Most of the time, anyway. I mean, the only, no one's screaming back at us just yet.
Do you remember that movie Johnny Mnemonic or whatever with
Oh yeah, Keanu Reeves.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
He got
and he
trapped
could
in
like jack in and like see like he was like a
before
transit.
Matrix. This is
Yeah,
like early
yeah,
90s.
yeah.
Yes, we live in that world now. Welcome to Wake Up and Deliver, as always, with John and myself. We're bringing all the fun there is. Finally got some warm weather up here in Canada. I can wear a t-shirt. Don't have to wear those sweaters. John's sporting his baseball hat.
Yeah.
He's getting ready for the
Long,
season.
yeah, long sleeve. Actually, we are though. My buddy is like signed us up to play like a summer kind of league thing with them, like softball and stuff like that. So I was talking to
Yeah.
my girlfriend about it yesterday, and she's very pumped and wants to hit training already because it's like a co-ed league. So my buddy's happy because he's like, normally it's harder to fill the mixed teams, so he's all over it.
Interesting. I've never done one of those things. I should do more of those adult competitive sports
My
things.
brother was doing one for years, and my brother, when he was younger, was like a very, very strong baseball player, like sort of scholarship level and stuff like that. So he jokes sometimes. He's like, yeah, I'm playing in this league and just crushing these like home runs. So he's like, I have to try to hold back. And it's funny though because we're all older these days, so it's kind of like that quintessential like he runs around like bum knees, like bad back, like what I mean. But like still has that like muscle memory from when he was a lot younger.
Well, as you guys can clearly see, me and John are full of our coffee already.
Yeah.
So we need to wake everybody else up. Welcome, everybody. Good morning, everybody. Let's start off with our usual John reaction, coffee morning brain food. And what do we got today? Conversation enriches the understanding, but solitude is the school of genius.
I don't know so much about this one. I'll have to look up Ed later and see, where he's at. I don't recognize his name off the top of my head. Someone probably in the audience being like, he's super famous, like super
How
smart.
could you not know Edward?
Yeah, how do you not know EG?
The Gibbons.
I think I don't know. I think that's like a bit of a mixed bag, right? Like there's a lot of kind of information that really speaks about the new ideas and sort of innovation really coming from like the connections of random things. Like Stephen Johnson's written like a number of good books like talking about like where good ideas come from and stuff like that. And in one of his books, he makes a really interesting frame around the transition in Western Europe at the time, going from sort of like an alcohol kind of based culture to a coffee based culture, like as coffee houses really took off. Not so much that coffee versus alcohol, but it was more the fact that because coffee houses were something that became popular during the day and people were then up and excited and like there was a lot of conversation happening, that it was really a strong period of sort of progress and innovative thought and things like that. So I don't disagree that I think you need time to be able to like evaluate an idea and really think about it. That said, though, I think that if you're not having conversations and you're not getting exposed to different types of thinking, the idea that you're just going to continually stumble onto like these new connections and very innovative paths, I think honestly is a little bit of a fallacy.
But
And I
it's not
used
what
to
the
say,
quote is saying. It's like, hey, you need to talk to people to understand things. But at the same time, you need some alone time to really think them through. Because you can't just regurgitate. You can't just be like, hey, here it is. And you understand it. You need time to process things. Like having that instant reaction because of the, as I call it, instant oatmeal days now, where everything has to be right away. You have to have an answer for everything instantly.
Yeah.
I think causes problems for a lot of people. People don't fundamentally go in depth and think about things.
Okay, that's more fair. More fair.
I defend my coffee breaks.
You can win it. You win that one today for sure.
Yes. All right. What are we talking about today? We have a quote that I pulled from John's newsletter because he wants to pay a little bit of homage. Funny enough, I'm wearing one of my Polish shirts today anyway.
Very unplanned, actually.
Very unplanned.
That's just the level of connectedness you get here on Wake Up and Deliver. It just flows that well. So these are a couple of quotes. I'll let it sit there for a second so people can read it. But I had I did a bigger article yesterday for the newsletter on InPost, and their results and how strong those results were, especially
So
for
explain to everybody who InPost is and what do they do and where they're located, just because for context.
so InPost is like let's say essentially a last mile delivery provider, right? Getting those packages to customers. The big differentiator and something that's wildly more popular in Europe than it is in North America is having that execution done through like parcel lockers or Pudo points, like pick up, drop off sort of points, right? Like to home delivery obviously still happens, but the European markets are much they've really rapidly adopted sort of out of home delivery, like same sort of with like a lot of the Chinese markets, right? There's huge benefits obviously for doing it when it comes to a carrier and service side. So InPost is actually the largest provider of automated parcel machines in Europe, right? So a little bit of their own sort of development where they originated in Poland, where they're wicked strong, like just wicked strong in terms of like market penetration and the amount of volume that goes through their network. And then through several acquisitions, they've kind of spread a little bit more through Western Europe and now service obviously the UK and France and Spain and things like that, Germany. So there's lots of there's a big footprint there. But what I thought was interesting more from these quotes was more the fact that like there's two ways that these out of home networks are typically done, and one of them is obviously through these lockers, right? Like assets and hardware, like done through these lockers, and then the other one is through these pickup delivery networks, which are typically partnerships, right? Which is where they're doing what you see even done here, right? Where you can go to like a Staples or you can go to a Whole Foods, you can go to a Kohl's or whatever, and interact like for retailers like Amazon or like they're just kind of like an access point, but it's not really like their core business. They just do it as like a bolted on service. Obviously the pickup drop off locations, like that's like way cheaper, right? Like some other retailer, some other business already has the infrastructure, they're paying the bills, like they've got their building, whatever, and you're just kind of like layering on a service on top of it. Whereas lockers, like their hardware, it's essentially tantamount to an asset-based carrier, right? Where they have trucks and hubs and stuff like that. Like there's a lot of costs associated with it.
It's interesting to see a lot more of this automation come out for these simpler services and the mechanics behind it. I think they're popping up all over everywhere else. It doesn't seem like as popular here in North America, but I mean, um, I think we'll see it soon enough as people want more of that convenience or quote unquote ability to pick it up at leisure in a safe location, because these lockers provide some stability against porch pirates, right? And then if you can have it, at your place of work or a density area that you're driving by where you stop and you can grab all your stuff, it makes a lot more sense than people stealing it off your front porch. Or even have it in your community. Like we already have them, at least, in mailboxes. You have those mailboxes, the community ones.
Yeah, but only like in Canada, and the same thing. Only Canada Post can use those. Like no one else has access to those.
Right, but I'm surprised that Canada Post should lease out the area around it and provide ability for lockers and lease out lockers as they're part of their service. Is what I was trying to get at. Like create a service, be like, hey, Amazon, all these guys, this is the service we brought. You can use our lockers. They're branded Canada Post. You can drop them off, and this will be far more convenient. I think that'd be an interesting play by postal services here in North America as a way to kind of control that narrative still. John never thought about that. So now he's like, oh,
You know what? It's not that
I'll give you some solitude to think about it.
Oh, I will. I'm going to go away and I'm going to ponder in the dark and come back with something really insightful. Costanza coming back with T-Bone. Anyways, but like you can tell like Matt and I laughing. Everyone's like, what? I don't even understand what that means. It's like dating ourselves with that Seinfeld joke. Yeah, I don't disagree. I think the interesting thing though is that one, they take up enough space, and then two, there's quite a bit of like user experience around it, right? And I think that's something super interesting that InPost is doing. They really do see the locker as a customer experience. So how like their app is really well done, how they interact with the locker, the way they do the notifications, like everything is really polished. And by getting people onto their app and using the app to make payments, which is something that they do now and stuff, it really just facilitates the whole ecosystem. I would love to see the postal people do it, whether it's USPS or Canada Post. I just don't think they have enough like dedication to that level, that
It's
level of service to make it
it
happen.
it's funny. I'm gonna preach something. I'm probably gonna get in shit from it later, but um, that experience is what really sets you above everybody else. And it's not about what you can do, because a lot of people can do what you can quote unquote do. It's the experience and the level of other things that John and I have talked about. And this is one thing I'm gonna admit on live on the interweb. I'm not the best at. One thing I can do is operation get things done, but that extra level of experience where I'm like, it's not a big deal. That's where Cat usually beats me up for it and goes, no, we got to make sure this is done correctly. No, we got to make sure the experience is perfectly fine. Like, no, we got to make sure the PODs are there instantly. When you send a POD, because for me, I don't think it's a big deal, but she's like, hey, cut out the person's thumbs. Don't have it, because drivers will send it on their legs, right? Like, cut it off so you don't see the person's body in it. Just make sure it's just the paperwork. I'm like, does it make a difference? But those little extra
No,
things.
it makes a difference. I'm on Team Cat with that one for sure.
But my point is that those things do make a difference, right? Like if it was entirely up to me, I'm like, just push it through. It's not the craziest thing. But thankfully, I have someone that cares about that kind of stuff and pushes those ideas through, because that enhances the experience for the other person on the other end, right? For me, the experience is like, I got it delivered. Yes, because it's operational. That's my job. But the experience is really where you really need to shine. Where I'm going to bring an old analogy where my dad used to, because I used to do construction with my dad, used to do flooring. My dad used to tell me, when you lay tile on the floor, it really doesn't matter if the tiles are crooked, as long as you grout perfectly. Because once the lines are all done and everything's perfectly done, you don't see the crookedness as much as if you screwed up the grouting. So what I mean by that is the final experience of what you've done is far more important than the middle and the beginning. You still have to do everything right all the way through, but the perfect end result of how it looks at the very end, the polishedness of it, is really what brings you home and makes that final experience amazing.
Well, yeah, it definitely adds that next level. I would say, it's probably easier for people to connect with if you think about it like on the other side. It's that like everything can be done really well, but then because that last 5% or whatever is not done or is done really sloppy, you notice it, and then it inherently kind of just like enters your brain and you like project it backwards onto what your perceived quality of anything is.
Mhm.
And then, I think what you're, just for people listening out there, like especially anyone that is running a service-based business or something like that, the challenge with a lot of these things and where a lot of people get stuck in this trap, right, is that little things like what Matt's saying. It's like, hey, you know what? When you're scaling and you're building and you're doing 100 different things, like, you know, making sure that picture, for example, or making sure that that X is exactly perfect probably seems like a disproportionate amount of work versus value, especially compared to everything else that you have to do. The challenge, though, is that if that essentially bakes into your processes and that's how you're always going to behave, what's going to end up happening is that it's not like the one thing that's going to be a problem or the two. It's that sooner or later you're going to have like 10, 15, 20 of these like little things, and then when you really want to like clean up that polish and give that, Matt, that final like, ooh, look at this wow factor, it's going to feel like you've got like this much work, when if each one of those things was sort of addressed properly and completely the first time, it never would have come up, and you would have been able to keep building on that really clean polish right from the start.
Exactly. And that goes back to what we're talking about, is that great UI, a great system that helps you brings you to it. So it's not about just providing lockers; it's that whole ecosystem that you provide with it. And that's where I think a lot of companies do fail when they provide a new. And I find this a lot with drivers. When
Mm.
they provide a new app for a driver, they are not driver centric. They'll have a lot of buttons, they'll have a lot of different menus, and drivers only want like 3 or 4 places to click to be able to go on, because they're not tech savvy. I'm not saying they're not tech savvy, but they're not as wanting to be tech savvy as you're driving. You want it very simple, very quick, and very undistracting. Um,
Well, sorry, it's funny. It's because like I get asked a lot by different providers to like look at their software and give them feedback on the platform, or whatever. Like these newer small businesses, startups, or whatever that are trying to break in. And it's funny. You get like these two camps very often. You either get these guys that like really understood the challenges and like the data and everything, and have like gone to the walls to make this really great data product, which then I kind of unfortunately very often burst their bubble in saying that, yeah, but like your target audience is probably not gonna really like they need all of that, but that level of detail is really not usually in their sort of like skill set or the way that they work.
Yeah.
And then on the flip side, some people get so ultra obsessed with like knowing that that's like their customer. They make a beautiful UI and it looks really clean and it looks really polished, but then inherently it's way too basic. Like
Yeah.
it's like guys, like it might really work well and it look pretty and stuff like that, but it's so oversimplified that it's not actually a great tool for professionals. So it ends up being like a really mixed bag of performance.
I agree. I agree. Let's chat about WestJet leaving the crazy, crazy profitable, quote unquote profitable area of air freight. Let's get this out of the way.
Yeah, WestJet tried to make a go since COVID of like getting into cargo. Obviously, everyone is all about air cargo. Basically, for anyone that doesn't know, WestJet's like a I don't know, maybe like a 1B. I don't know how you'd classify it. Like Air Canada, if Air Canada is the 1A type provider in Canada for consumer airline, WestJet's probably like a 1B maybe. And then from the freight side, you actually have CargoJet, which is a wildly strong Canadian operation. Then you have Air Canada, and then you had WestJet getting into it. And basically, it just they couldn't make the unit economics work. There's a lot of talk saying that they missed a window and stuff when it first happened with COVID, and then by the time they got up and running, the planes they were using were too small. What they were trying to do wasn't catching enough attention. They weren't able to flip over to charter work either. So they're essentially shutting it down, and they're going to continue to manage freight just on consumer aircraft, like a lot of airlines are doing these days. Like when you see these zone skipping programs in Canada and the US, for example, that's how they're doing it. I don't know. It's interesting because realistically, it shows the difference in the market, right? Because air freight is dominating out of Asia these days, right? Especially.
Yeah.
Yet domestically, once product gets into your country, no one is really clamoring to no when to move freight across the country in a few hours.
Yeah, and part of it was WestJet wasn't strong into the Asian market, and they weren't part of the Star Alliance. They were part of, I think, like One World, which is British Airways, or I think maybe KLM, which is the KLM Air France, which didn't have a strong North American Asian market either, which kind of prohibited them to capitalize on that aspect of it.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like you think that something that is a given that you will be able to I'll just build it and everybody will run towards it because I'm going to offer something that everybody needs right now would have been successful. And I find this happens with the small guys and the big guys very often where it's like, oh yeah, I'm a trucking company. I should be able to do a brokerage, no problem. I'll make lots of money. And what ends up happening is you start subsidizing all the other things that you're doing versus focusing on that thing that you're doing great. And that's not always the best way to do it. You don't always have to go vertical expansion. You can expand horizontally, keep growing in the way that you're doing because you're very good at it. And we've seen this happen with a few Canadian companies recently. Like, I don't know if people know, like Worldwide Carriers recently went out of business in Canada. We had JB8, JB something out of Kitchener went out of business in Canada. There's a few of them in the US, same thing. And a lot of the same history is there. It's mismanagement and rapid expansion into the periphery of the business that they think they can do well. And you should be very cautious. Just because you're a great brokerage doesn't mean you'll be a great trucking company. Just because you're a great brokerage doesn't mean you'll be a great warehouse company. Just because you're a great warehouse doesn't mean you'll be a great last mile company. Like these things are fundamentally different, and you might be good at them, or might be able to provide that service, but you got to be very cautious in how you do it and not get caught in that system.
Well, it's funny, man, because two things. One, like I agree. I tell people all the time to be mindful about just because something seems similar, is it really the same or is it close enough? It's important to understand. I was advising a startup last year, and I got along really well with like most of the team, except one of the co-founders didn't always appreciate like the operational focus and stuff like that.
Right.
And I said to them, I said, listen, like growing all over the place and trying to do 10,000 different things, it's like it's not going to matter if everything else is sloppy, if you're failing, if like, you don't build that flywheel and that sort of like that, flow of trust and execution. And I was really trying to guide them in terms of focusing on that. Needless to say, like, certain things improved and certain things kind of stand out in the wind. But they recently, and congratulations to them, they are doing very well. Like now, like they raised again. And I noticed a share the other day that was talking about having to refocus and stuff like that and bring things in. And I kind of laughed to myself because I was like, yeah, I guess when the people giving you millions of dollars are telling you to do it, you're just going to get it done. But like, it was the same concept. It was like, you're going to hurt yourself by trying to tap into everything, because yeah, you'll do everything to your point. You're like, you'll do all these things, but they're going to be sloppy. Most people don't focus enough on a core service and then expanding strategically with things that are very close in degree and parallel to what they're already doing. It's tantamount to something of saying like, "Oh, I do dry service, so I can do frozen too." It's like, yeah, I mean, technically the stuff moves both on trucks, but it's not the same.
I do dry service. I can do LTL just as easily. It's just add a few skids. It's not a big deal,
Yeah,
right? It
yeah.
happens very often, and people expect it to happen overnight, right? Um, I get caught up in these kind of ideas all the time too, where I drive by a warehouse. I'm like, oh, maybe I should grab a warehouse. Then I kind of slap myself, going, no, finish building what you've started. Focus on what you're
Yeah.
good at. You'll build it when when you can. Like, don't take on the additional costs until you're able to, right? Just because it feels good, just because it looks good, doesn't make it necessarily. The added pressure might even crumble your core business because you're not focusing where you're supposed to.
Well,
And
or quite frankly, crumble you like as the person,
yeah,
right? Like, and I mean, that's not a slight against anyone, but I mean, I think like, everyone has so much capacity, bandwidth, like high performance time, right? Like I think that that's probably a good way to think about it, is that like if I have X amount of hours a day where I can be at like peak performance, where is that going to get sort of focused, and what am I going to apply it to? And anyone that tries to say that they can be at peak all the time and with multiple different things, just lying to themselves. And if any investor believes that, they're probably going to find themselves on the wrong side of a Wall Street bets result where everything everything tanks.
yeah, and I mean, there's people obviously that carry certain companies. There's certain individuals that with the additive that 20% of the people run 80% of the companies usually, right? Um, And there is that function, but you do get that burnout where you stop focusing on the things that you should be focusing on and on what you're great at. And that's just part of the reality, right? That's why you should, if you're great at something, expand on it, talk to your customers, see if they want those additional services from you. Because they might have a great partner already, and there might be like, you might think, oh, I can just add it on. And the customer's like, no, no, I just want you to do this one thing. I don't want you doing
Mhm.
everything else. And plus, you're
Yeah.
already, 10% of my business. I'm not giving you 11%. I don't care how great you are at something else. And that happens often too, where people are like, oh, I already do a lot of their Canadian operations. They'll give me their American and overseas stuff as soon as I do it. Doesn't happen that way, right? Like it's
Well, or they'll say that they might be open to it, like just being casual, and then you bank on it, and then it still doesn't happen, or it has a really long sales period. But it's a good, interesting little segue, though. We talked backstage, and I think one day we'll have to like screen record while we're talking backstage and just show people all of the magic that happens back there. But anyways, um, that's like, oh boy. Okay,
the
we
30
so
seconds before when John comes on.
Wednesday, well, it was like solid 10 minutes today. Wednesday is Liberation Day for the
Yep.
US, which is like the Trump tariff days. So it's kind of like a decent little segue into a couple things, right? So tariffs allegedly coming, and still really going to be implemented, these reciprocal tariffs for everybody. Lots of impact to different types of businesses, no matter like what you're in, right? So like let's just call it basic cost increases. And then to your point, you're going to get a lot of different people probably saying that they can help in all kinds of different ways. Service providers, we can do everything. We can do this. We can do that. We can do whatever. Um, what are you seeing, like kind of like as big impacts? Or like, what are you thinking that is some solid advice or guidance for people that are about to deal with all of this?
I mean, the unpredictability of everything that is happening, there's not really, I don't think, I'm going to say it off the top. I'm not the most qualified person to say what you should and shouldn't do. And it depends on where you sit on the fence of your beliefs are and whatnot. Um, but a lot of these things are out of a lot of people's control. You can only adjust as they come. And what I would suggest to do is be as informed as you can. And being informed meaning, you might not agree with the policies, you might not agree with what they're doing, but you should be damn well reading everything possible that they're putting out there as information, because reacting after the fact might be too late. Knowing even a small little tidbit might give you a competitive edge on what to do. So, tariffs are coming on Wednesday. It's Liberation Day, as John mentioned. Waiting till Thursday to see what is going to get tariffed, you're already, I think, a day late. Like, you should be doing the research as much as possible and having it prepped and already looking at what happened previously to see what's going to happen on Wednesday. And I'll give you a great example. And this is some of my vendors and my partners were telling me this over the weekend, and it was a great analysis. So one of my vendors goes to me, "Oh, Matt, shit hit the fan on Friday afternoon." I'm like, "Oh, what do you mean?" He goes, "The market is extremely hot all of a sudden." He goes, "All week long, it was quiet, and now this Friday, it blew up." And so he has this format, and I'm not going to tell you really reveal how he does it because it was kind of way of providing it to me. But and essentially, he takes a radius of looking how much freight is available in the marketplace, looking at a load board, and then he looks at the specific area at a specific degree, and he noticed a 5-time increase on Friday. So on Thursday it was X, Friday it was 5 times more. He goes, "It's going to be very busy until tariffs hit." So you already know this happened last time. Everybody's pushing a lot of their freight into inventory as quickly as
Mhm.
possible before the tariffs hit. Because what happens is they get the product across, they don't have to pay the tariff, but they're still going to increase their price to help mitigate some of the costs they're going to have down the road. This should have been happening for the last month. It shouldn't be just an automatic push on Friday, the weekend before the tariffs hit. You should have been pushing as much as possible earlier on, because now what happened now is on Friday your costs have gone through the roof. Where you're trying to find a truck and there's only so many trucks available, you're not going to get that product, and you're going to be panicking far more. And that's what I mean by knowing those little timbits and how everything's going to be affected. The bigger companies knew, hey, there's going to be a mad rush. Let's get some of this product through quicker and be far more ready when it does hit. Does that make sense? Did I answer your question correctly?
Yeah, yeah. I think a lot of the bigger companies have been. They've been moving stuff like at an accelerated pace for a while. I'm sure you are seeing, some knee-jerk reactions. I mean, the challenging thing is though there's probably a lot of businesses that don't have much play, right? If you're doing any type of manufacturing, assembly, kind of whatever, you might have just got your parts, you might have just done this, you might have just done that, and you have to push it through. I don't disagree with you though that reacting at the last minute is a challenge. Um, I do agree the fact that I think, and the advice that I've been giving people for a while is just that one way or another, it sounds like, sort of the world of yesterday is changed, right? Whether it's a specific tariff, whether it's changes to the way that product was moving or anything like that. And I think, the biggest benefit that anyone can do with their business is not necessarily to just be reactive, like trying to jump from, you know, uh, shady advantageous situation A to situation B to situation C, because like, you're not going to get the right kind of stability, and sooner or later you're going to run out of rocks to jump on anyway.
Hmm.
But to be really intentional about what you're doing and understanding, like, what, to your point, like what the real impact is, and then start to think about what you know you can do. Because here's the funniest thing is that all of these businesses are, worried about cost increases and passing it on to the customer and stuff like that, but it's also a really good opportunity to potentially use the situation to expose customers to different options, right? So if you've always been giving free shipping and you were able to do that because you were shipping duty free into the US with de minimis or whatever, maybe now is your time to say, hey, like, we can still provide you with free shipping, but we've got to move it to a 2 to 4 day service, not next day. I can almost guarantee you that a high percentage of customers will be down. They'll be like, "Of course, I don't want to pay more. I'm happy to wait the extra day or 2 days or whatever." And, that actually becomes a huge advantage for a lot of businesses, right? So I think that, there's a multitude of things that people can consider, but I do think the worst thing you can do is just be reactive and panicky and try to jump to the next area of quick win or quick opportunity, like shortcutting the system.
So I know we're at time, but I'm having
Well, you got to bring it out. Like
I got to
I
bring
can
it out.
see it. I
It's
can see
sitting
it.
there. I was like, oh, I gotta say it.
Let's go.
And we talked about a little bit about it last week. You brought a great example up last week where you talked about this individual that that's doing quite well, and they're very focused on a single product, and they're
Mhm.
moving great. That is a great example of people who are going to get hit the hardest, for me, in my opinion, because they're not in tuned to what's going on. They're not looking at their supply
Yeah.
chain, which is going to be really affected. So all these drop shipment people that have got onto these TikTok bandwagons and Instagram ideas
Mhm.
of buying in China, doing this, and they're not paying attention to the wider things, they're going to see the biggest drop. I
Yeah.
think on their products, and they're going to be like, why is this happening? Because they won't know it until they get their bill from UPS or FedEx, and it's going to be like, hey, all of a sudden you're paying 10 grand in tariffs, and they're going to be like, what do you mean I'm paying 10 grand in tariffs? They're like, haven't you been following the news? Like, haven't you been listening to Wake Up and Deliver every week? Like, what are you
Probably not.
doing, right? And I think those types of businesses, Etsy's and all these other companies, even the ones that Etsy companies that you're buying Canadian product, or as a Canadian you're buying American product, are now going to be affected by these tariffs. And you're like,
Mhm.
well, that doesn't make sense. Like, I didn't know that I would get tariffed on this. And that is, I think a lot of these small medium companies are going to get hit the hardest on these tariffs.
For
Like,
sure. And also now being in a position where it's like, okay, you weren't thinking about it, you weren't doing anything, you're not working with anyone to help you. What are you gonna just go hit up every, different carriers, different 3PL providers or whatever, and start doing that process while everyone else is doing it too?
yeah.
You know what I mean? Like it's gonna be challenging. I agree. The smaller businesses are definitely gonna have a hard time with it and stuff. So
When people feel
with
surprised,
that,
when
with
people are
that,
starting
we
to look,
are
when there's multiple, oh, fine, go. Cut me off
no,
this
go
time.
ahead. No, you go ahead. Finish. I was trying to help you out because normally
I
you're
know
like
you were. I
very
know
like
you were. I was just gonna say, the more people that are asking all these different providers about rates increases the whole rate system. As
exactly.
supply, as people start seeing the demand, like if I have one person asking me about a lane, it's gonna be X. But if I have 15 people asking me about the same lane, I'm gonna start progressively getting higher because I know there's gonna be less and less availability. That's my last point. John, final
Oh, no,
thoughts.
but that's it, but that's true, and then those final thoughts is that then you take everybody doing that to, hundreds and thousands of different providers, and then different people having different subjective amounts that they would bring it up, and then the next guy being like, "Oh, well, if this is the rate, then this is what it's gonna be," and it just keeps, kinda like house prices, they just keep jumping and stuff like that, and until it really cools off demand-wise, you're not gonna see much of a change, so I agree, some good points and stuff that people really need to be thinking about, so it should be an interesting week to see where this finally settles and what actually goes into place versus what doesn't or what's get pushed off or whatever, but the uncertainty in the market for sure is causing a lot of havoc
And if you want to be informed, join us next week for Wake Up and Deliver
every Monday, like just
every Monday. We're just the thing to listen to now, right? That's just
it is 100%.
on that note. Bye, everybody. Thanks for joining us.